Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is the Curly Hair Mafia, and tonight we're taking on Bird Box. This is a 2018 film that was released in a limited release and on Netflix this year. I'm Adverbia.
I'm Dr. Rubidium.
And I am DN Lee.
So thanks for joining us. This film is based on a novel by Josh Malerman, a novel of the same title that was written in 2014. I believe he's a British author. It follows the main character, Mallory, and two children as they're making their way down a river. It's told in flashback over the course of 5 years, and it's a near future, or basically modern day, where people begin to kill themselves in what appears to be mass hysteria, hallucinations and visions, which are eventually attributed to some kind of creature or being. The main character of Mallory is played by Sandra Bullock. Her partner is played by Trevante Rhodes, and there are notable performances by B.D. Wong and John Malkovich, along with newcomer who plays Olympia. I didn't write down her name. She was in the Dolly Parton movie that just came out on Netflix as well. More on that later. I'll pull up the name.
Dumpling. She's playing in it's a Netflix show, Dumpling. I think she's in Dumpling.
That's right. It's the Dumpling movie.
Okay.
Yeah. That's right. All right, ladies.
That's a sad transgression.
First impressions, ladies. What'd you think?
Well, go ahead. Danielle is getting serious. Oh.
So it was interesting. That's all I can say. It's like imagine going through life like this, but only when you're outside. I enjoyed it. It was intense. Everybody was talking about it on my timeline, so it made me a little. I thought they hyped it up so much, so I tried to dampen my expectations, but I enjoyed it. It was. I wouldn't call it a scary movie. Some people were calling it like it's the scariest movie ever, and I'm like, nope. But it was a thriller. It was a thriller.
How about you, Ray?
I think, it was a fun thriller. I say fun, but I watched it Christmas Day with my family because we're like that, and we were like, oh, how festive! Let's go from Great British Bake Off Christmas Edition to Bird Box. So. It was a good action movie thriller. I don't know if I would call it, when people are like, oh my God, I'm so scared. I was like, I don't know if it's that scary. But I thought it was good, but it was also one of those movies that the more I think about it, the more I'm like,
Same, exact same.
I found the movie terrifying.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
And note that you're the mother of us three.
I really think that plays a big role into it because it opens with her and these two children who are not old enough to care for themselves, particularly in this environment. And she is their sole means for survival, right? And so over the course of the movie, through the flashbacks, we see how she becomes more and more vulnerable. And it terrified me. And I really feel like the whole story is an extended metaphor for the sheer utter panic of parenthood.
Okay, I'll accept that. Okay. Now, it's interesting. Before I watched the movie, I saw Black Twitter commenting on it and putting its stamp on it. And what I saw was people, taking memes of Sandra Bullock and using what we typical here is this very typical, like, Black mom voice. And it was hilarious. And so I was like, I wanted to watch it with that. And she was stern. She was a tough customer mom. She pulled no punches. I think one meme was like, don't you ever think I won't F you up? I think it was one of those.
And that's the thing is, like, you said, Lolly, that she was becoming more vulnerable. I saw it as the reverse. Her character became more and more self-reliant, as you would have to be in these disaster kind of apocalypse type movie. But she became, in some ways, she was always like, when you see the flashback of her kind of in her pregnancy, a bit like, do you know what's happening to you? Like, like not quite, but I think she became more like pragmatic, but more also like bitch, I will cut you. I have no patience, not for my kids, not for your jackass. Like, she just became like more like all business all the time.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I would, but that's even funny because as we'll discuss, even though that's how her character is presented, there are glaring, like, what the hell did you just do? You know? So.
It's interesting that we're interpreting the word vulnerable differently. Like, when I say that she became more and more vulnerable, I mean in circumstance. Like, first she's with her sister, and then she's with a group, and then she's with a partner, and then she's alone. You know, so by circumstance, she's having all of these safety nets like stripped away and stripped away and stripped away, to where she has no other option but to take charge of the situation and rise to the occasion, right? And then later on, as the movie progresses and we get these flashbacks, they kind of reveal to us that she has this psychological trauma because of how everything unfolds in her relationship with these children, and that she's emotionally distanced herself from these children. So I think the way that she's portrayed as a mom, like what Black Twitter was pointing out as the way that Black moms behave, and the way that I also identified with the way Latina moms behave, was portrayed as something of an aberration in a mother.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, it was interesting. So if we were looking at the movie as a metaphor or a commentary, it is a commentary on how people who grow up in marginalized or vulnerable circumstances have to prepare their children very immediately for the no nonsense of life. It's like, we don't have time for this stuff. I know you're only 4 or 5, but if something happens to me, you save yourself. Like, this very no nonsense, very directional. This is how you survive, because nobody out here is going to have your back. Nobody. And I think it's an interesting metaphor in that. I don't think that's what the movie was going for, but
but for Sandra Bullock, the typical white mom, it took like the fucking end of the world for her to be the kind of mom that like most moms in the world are, which is you got to be self-sufficient and get off your ass and stop with your nonsense. Like, you know, and I think like that I'm just like, but I think motherhood, what does motherhood mean? I think that was interesting to me, because when people were critical of the characters' like lack of emotional connection, what do we think motherhood is, and what should a good mother look like, and what does motherly affection look like? And of course, in this movie, you're in this like extraordinary environment, and I thought that some of the conversations, which as someone who's not a parent, I was like, I'm going to shut my mouth and not, okay, let me go. But I have a mom. But when you look at like, what do we expect from women that are mothers? And you saw the real cultural differences, which is what we're talking about between motherhood. But of course, when you say motherhood in the United States, what you're really saying, like womanhood, is white women and white motherhood, because oftentimes the whiteness is the default. And then people go asterisk, except for this other big groups of people. So that part with Bird Box was interesting.
And you bring up you and I've talked back channel about this, Ray, that it's a glaring missing demographic in this whole movie.
It's really interesting. I think though that there's a lot to talk about here. And I think, as I'm not a parent, but trying to look at that and going, oh my God, like every time I was looking, and I was watching with my own mom, and that was really interesting, because to kind of see her reaction and hear her thoughts and my own, we were like, some things were very different, obviously, of how she was imagining things and things that she would do. But on the other hand, it's like she was the same thing of being mad. Like, when I told you to stay in that effing boat, like she was like, yeah, I would have said that.
I kind of, my mom doesn't do scary movies, but I kind of wish she would, so that I would watch it with her. But at the same time, it's a little scary because I know exactly what her response would be. Like, if you want to see a horror movie, if this were happening in my life, if this situation unfolded and I was the 5-year-old girl, there would be the scene where my mom like laid out the kitchen knife and be like, okay, we're going to take her eyes out now. Because
this is life now.
Obviously, that's what we have.
Which I believe happens in the book. Some folks do that in the books. I was like,
eyes out. That I'm actually saying that nobody did that in the movie.
You know what? So yeah, I was wondering that too. Like I was like, is that where they go, like to survive? Like, so if we're getting into it, the no science. So first, I think about the science of it. Like, what does this mean? Like, do they immediately try to make themselves adaptive in this new environment by plucking their eyes out or gouging them or something? Or like, or do you do it at least to your children so that they're not tempted to do it? Because I don't know if I can do it to myself. I don't know.
That would seem logical, right? Like if you know that it's seeing that is the bad part, you know, grab that contact lens cleaning solution and just, you know, like take care of it. You know?
I mean, do you have to be all the way blind? Can you have just a little macular degeneration? You know, so you can.
You're like, well, cataracts work. Can we just get some cataracts glasses?
Yeah, you know, because the thing is, because just being able to see shadows is beneficial. You know, like being able to discern spaces helps you navigate things. And so, yeah, so like, can I just smear? Let me just smear.
Vaseline. So let's get into the science of it a little bit. So in the film, it starts out with when you get the first flashbacks of people just outside, and all of a sudden they see something, a change comes over their eyes, they're staring off into space, and they go into various delusions, and it's not always the same delusion, right? Yeah. So there's not like a pattern to the delusion. Is very personalized. People immolate themselves, people throw themselves in front of vehicles, people stab themselves, people do themselves in a variety of ways. And so whatever is doing it is invisible, so to speak, but it's people see things that are horrific, that it can still affect you if it's on film.
Yeah.
So or on paper.
Yes, or on paper. Oh, that's right, or on paper. So
I missed that. I missed it on
sketches. The sketches.
We'll get to that. I have questions about that. I have questions. Put a pin in that. I have questions about that. So, but it can't come inside. So it can't seem to come into dwellings. It can't seem to come into cars. Even
it's not auditory.
Right. It's not auditory. Even something like paper is enough to block it out. Like. So, or just closing your eyes, walking down the street.
So it's not light. You know, when we think about vision, if some of these interventions are working, then it's not something it's as easy as, oh, the light has to be, go into your eye and interact with. No. Because if it was that, some of the visual mechanisms they're using are kind of bullshit, like newspaper over the windows. It's not pitch dark. Doesn't have to be pitch dark, right?
Not a barrier per se.
Nope.
And my question was, most of the scenes take place in the daytime, and so I was always curious, like, could they go out at night? Like they didn't, but I was beginning to think it was sunshine related because it was always sunny days when things went down, never on cloudy days.
Black, would they be able to affect you?
Like could you go out at night and go to the store? Like I do remember there was one scene, if I remember well, where Sandra Bullock is in the kitchen and she hears that little wisp behind her. Like so the movie makes you think they're these haunts, like they're dementors, I guess. I don't know.
Like ghosts. Like they're like ghosts with the wind and the sound and the
Yeah. And so you get a few warnings that they're around and like nobody picks it up. But like you suddenly see leaves blowing. Like that's the thing. The leaves kind of they blow around. The birds come in later. That's why it's called Bird Box. But that whole wisping and wind moving and light shadows, it was only one night scene in the entire thing. And so which makes me think or wonder, would they be safe? In other words, could they just switch to being nocturnal and they'd be okay?
So would there have to be no ambient light at all? So nocturnal, but like only go out in the dark of the moon?
I don't know, because like when they're on the water, they just put a blanket over their head. Like it's as simple as Like it won't, like, how do you, my question was always, even if you put the blanket over, what if it slipped in? Like, can it slip in under that shade? Like, and like it's in
That's
there.
the thing is the blanket was clearly not like a tight weave, right? It's not a blackout blanket. It's not the newspaper is, you know, you're still able to see in a room, you know. I mean, that's when you're looking at these types of things, then you're like, okay, so we're not sort of, you know, electromagnetic spectrum, obviously, because they're, you know, radio, you know, UV, IR, like you're just thinking like, okay, so none of that stuff. And the other thing I found really interesting is birds, but not dogs.
Yeah. In fact, I don't.
What's going on with the rats? I didn't see any rodent, which, you know, I'm just saying.
I saw no mammals.
No mammals at all. Yeah.
I was curious, did they do themselves in as well?
I would think so.
Well, so what they don't show, which I get why they don't, because that would have been gruesome, but to understand, you know, the mechanism of this thing, I was like, what would happen to children? Like this idea that adults were doing it, but with children, you know what I mean? This idea of babies and toddlers would do this self-destructive behavior. So there were no children just passing by in the movie. And so like children were vulnerable because they were with adults, but they have the presence of mind to do it. And, you know, at first they have you thinking it's psychological. So if it's psychological, do you just have to have a strong enough will? You know, like, can your will be strong enough to overcome this thing? And it's not until halfway through that you finally see some sort of physical difference, like their eyes physically, you begin to understand that something weird and physical is happening to their eyeballs.
Yeah. So let's talk about the psychological aspect, because the other aspect that they bring in is the idea that there are certain people who are immune, and they're based on what we know from the way the other characters talk about them. They're people who were in insane asylums. They're people who have sketchy pasts, who acted weird, who seem to be loners or outsiders. And you know, when we talked about it among my family, we interpreted it as people who have already faced their demons or face their demons on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And so they're not affected by it because there's nothing bad enough that they can see that's worse than what they've already encountered in their life. So now that you bring up the point of children, like children experience reality differently, you know, because they're biologically, as they develop, their understanding of what's real and what's not real isn't the same as an adult. So children can imagine things that are quite terrifying that are not real at all, but to them they are real. So I wonder if children would be unaffected similarly.
Yeah. I found the whole psychological angle very problematic. From, you know, considering how many people have mental health issues of various types, that whole just seemed like, look, we're going to need some human monsters in this thing. So let's just make it, quote, the crazy people that will also end up being the villains in some real way. And when I think about, you know, people who have PTSD, some form of depression, attention deficit disorder, or, you know, like when you get, they really were like, oh, anybody who's whatever. And you're thinking like, that's a shitload of people, friend. Like, you know, and I was like, and then I was thinking to myself, if you're under this much strain, I would be watching everybody in that fucking house, because any one of them could become, you know, I mean, this is also the idea. So was it a particular diagnosis? Because if it's just the general, like, oh, they had these mental health problems, I'm thinking y'all all have PTSD now. So I would get your act fucking together. Like, you know, like that.
Okay. Yeah, and I didn't like the fact that they implied that only the criminally insane, you know, could suffer through this. In other words, they were the only ones who could walk around with their eyes open. You know, like, oh, look at us. We're wide open to the world because of whatever. Like, I have this insight, or my madness makes me possible. But like you said, they were the human monsters, because it wasn't just that they could see, that they were on a mission to make everyone open their eyes. Like, they were knocking on doors, trying to find the survivors and trying to force them to open their eyes. And so then they became, aiding whatever this thing is. And so they didn't seem to really I was surprised, like there were no children with those people. Like if there were children, would they be caring for their own little set of criminally insane children? Because that's what they wanted us to believe, that they were all the criminally insane. It wasn't.
I think that's the fun part of these types of movies. Same reason why I like zombie movies is because the zombies are one thing, but the scarier thing is always the human monster element, because there is always, besides the zombies, there's always some human or group of humans that's going to fuck it up for everybody. Yeah. And they are going to be worse, and they're going to be more diabolical, and they are going to be scarier. I mean, at some point you're like, okay, rustling in the trees, like, but what was more scary in this movie? Was it the people? That was more scary to me when they let that motherfucker in their house. And and he's a stone cold good actor. But when they let that whole thing happen, especially during like the labor scene, I was like, what the? And then, with the house hunting, those were scary. That was tension. But the the leaves in the mist, I was like, I get it. Like, it's the unseen monster.
I agree. And so back to that scene when they let the guy in, and I get the whole idea of trying to, help other people. No. I was fine with, I was with John Malkovich's character. He was no limit. He was like, no, they died. That's it. And they were like, no, we're not gonna do it. I was fine with, what? I get his tense, and I was like, you can sit out in the garage for a minute. I would have changed places because they arrested John Malkovich. They should have swapped it. But the minute that old boy said, when he was explaining, like, oh, I was hiding here and I came down, and then he was like, but the funny thing is, they had masks on too. The minute he said that, I was like, ooh, that's it. Why it would have been brainy.
That brings me. It's weird though, because that's almost a Clark Kent for me. Is when Sandra Bullock was like, "Let him on in. Seems like a great idea." I was like, I can't go with you on that, Sandy / Mallory. I cannot.
No, so that guy's name was Gary, I think. Gary.
Yeah, Gary.
So let's talk about the pictures that he had. Ray, what was your take on that? So they let him in. He seems like chill, whatever. Then as the two women are going into labor during that whole process, he takes out these sketches that he has of this scary looking face. And then that's when he decides to start pulling the paper off the windows and trying to make everybody see.
I mean, that was so weird because I'm like, either like, why now, right? And it's like, why look at them now? Unless this is what you do, kind of like the Hulk out, right? You've been let in and you're going to take all these sons of bitches down, but you had to look normal or they wouldn't have let you in. But now that you're in, and these bitches are distracted, and those sons of bitches, and this guy's in the garage, then you're going to Hulk out, basically. And then you can come in and take everyone in the house out, or show them the light. And so that was the weird thing, is I'm like, that is a long con. Or a short, actually, it was a pretty short con.
Do you think had an effect on him? Do you think the pictures had an effect on him?
But that's the thing, is when you saw the eye thing, like Danielle he was perfectly normal by the standards of this movie when he was trying to gain entry and trust into the house. Now, John Malkovich's character was like, no, bitch. And everybody else was like, I think it's fine. But then when he looks at the photos, then we see that he has undergone this slight physical change, right? Like his posture, his eyes, his like hair is a bit more tousled, his suit's a bit, I don't know. It was in some ways it was obvious, in other ways it was subtle. But so either he had never seen them before, and this just is like incredible timing. And then I'm like, why would you open them? Like, why do you have them? And why would you open them now? Unless you knew what the effect was, which we've seen before, right? We've seen that with intentionally like a rage monster, or in The Walking Dead, when the lady got trapped in a coffin, shot herself because she knew on the other side, when they let her out, she'd be a damn zombie and she was coming for everybody. And so, like, on the one hand, you wonder if, like, that was something that you could switch on and off. Like, I don't know. Like that whole part, I was like,
See, this is what I took from that. I thought he had the presence in him, and that when he was chill, it made that I thing regress. And so I thought he was like, hey, like you said, he was ready to Hulk out. He took his pictures out like, hey, let me show everybody my freak. And I thought, because I thought it was interesting, I thought thought the stress made them go into labor. That's how I interpreted it. Like, because I interpreted it as the thing was whipping around and like it was coming around, and then the stress of it, of his presence or the weirdness coming out, drew them into labor, because their labor just seemed weird and unexpected. And why would they go into labor at the exact same time like that?
Gotta advance the plot, Danielle. We need these.
You're right.
Yeah, so there's a lot of like mythology about sympathetic labor and how like labor in one person can trigger labor in another person. Like I don't know if that's what the author in the original story had in mind. I agree. I think it's just a plot advancing device, but that is something that's been used before, right? The idea that one labor can trigger another. I kind of interpreted it as the writers playing fast and loose with whatever kind of mental illness Gary supposedly had. So like maybe drew the pictures while he's having an episode, but doesn't remember drawing them, so was not affected by them. And then when he took them out again was triggered, or if he's just been crazy the whole time and Ray, like you said, just been hiding it, right? Just been just enough savvy to be able to wait and bide his time for the right moment. I'm trying to think how much time actually passed between when he comes in the house.
It felt like it was maybe 24 hours.
Yeah,
but
maybe
I'd have to go back and see.
I was under the impression just a couple days at most. Most.
Oh.
And I want to be clear, when I say crazy in this context, I'm referring to like Hollywood crazy.
Right.
Not like
no, I get it.
Like medically, clinically, anything, because
Hollywood
does what it wants.
I thought when he was talking about the criminal insane place up the street, I realized later, I'm like, oh, he's talking about himself. He was lying and saying he was an executive out of town. Like that was his lie.
That's why I think I almost like the idea from my own mind. I like the idea of him being that duplicitous, because that level of sociopathy or psychopathy, where you're like thinking like, you know, one of these, I'm just thinking like, you know, people who are at high functioning sociopaths, of which historically there have been some very powerful people, presidents, kings, generals, you know, day traders, default credit swap marketers. But I like the idea of it being a choice of, I'm going to systematically go house to house. But that's because I know that in these monster apocalypse movies, what always interests me is how we treat each other, not so much the monster. Under the stress of this environment, what goes on amongst the people. Yeah. And so that's why I am thinking like, oh, damn, that is fucked up. Like, not only did you purposefully wanted to harm these people, and not quick, right? You wanted it to be this whole kind of thing that you are in, which I'm just like, you know, and when you see it, like, because earlier, right, there's in the market.
Yeah.
They're in the market and you have the guy who's trying to like help me, you know, and they realize though that the something's not right with this dude in the freezer. And then you have your first self-sacrificing Negro movie. Which is all of them.
That is a side eye.
Which is all of them in the movie. And that's what kind of gave me the idea that this was an intentional action. I have no idea. But I think if anything, that's what I like about this movie is that the motivations, what they're seeing. Some people are clearly seeing like shit from their past, like the one lady calling out their mama, right? Or like, you know, people are, I like the fact in some ways that it's like, it's not a choose your own adventure movie, but in some ways it couldn't, there's so many maybe gaps and maybe they're not intentional that you're you could fill in what you think it is or the motivations are in some way, which I like. Some people don't like that in a movie like this, but
yeah. So you mentioned at least what could be a side eye, the whole trope of sacrificial Negro. That is a side eye. That is a major side eye.
2 Black characters in this movie.
And an Asian character.
And an Asian character.
Yeah.
And I love my some BD Wong. I sure do. From his Law and Order days. I love him so much. And to see them both sacrificing, and even though, of course, in the plot, especially the one dude really surprised me. The first time it happens in the movie, you're like, what? The first sacrifice, that really caught me off guard. But then when the next one, like, you're just like, for real? Like that part, and even in some way, BD Wong's character is self-sacrificing, and that one really hurt because I just like him so much.
We really believed in it, and they tied him up, going, okay, even if you wanted to hurt yourself, you can't, and whatever gets into the head overcomes it. Now, when it came to that dude in the freezer, he would have just froze, because I'm like, you've been in the freezer for 5 years. So first, that's
no. He's been in the freezer for like a day or 2 days, or some. It wasn't.
I thought a few days or weeks had gone by the time they got brave enough to go out to the store.
They ran out of supplies, or it was the loading dock. Like he was trapped on the loading dock or something.
He would have been stuck out there. Oh well, bruh. Oh well.
that was hard, but that's part of the science. And that part too was, I'm like you said, I'm like, wait, if he's in a freezer, or is it a refrigerator unit? If it's a refrigerator unit, still would have been damn cold, but that's different.
He shouldn't have made it for days. No. He should have.
Yeah, if it's like, that's one of those things that you're like, I feel like that one GIF, right, where the guy's like trying to make it work out.
Like, how are the birds still alive in that cage? The ones at the store, like. And
you put the birds in the freezer. That's
yeah. So by the time they go to the grocery store, it's probably been about a week at most, because this phenomenon starts to happen really, really quickly.
Yeah,
it spreads like wildfire. They run into this house. Even on my best grocery day, I could feed 6 people for a week. You know what I mean? Like 6 adults living in my house for a week before things would start to get a little bit sketchy.
And what, 2 people lived there before? Like, right? I'm trying to.
A couple. It was.
Yeah. You know what? Time felt longer to me in this thing. Like, for me, I felt like they were there together for a month or so before they ran out.
Maybe the flashback structure, because it's,
Yeah. No, you're right.
But they also were just slappy with time, because you're like, wait, what?
So the third sacrifice, where Tom, played by Trevante Rhodes, when he sacrifices himself, that felt genuine to me, because that to me read like that's what a father does.
Oh, agree. I don't disagree, but it's the whole like another.
Yes.
Yeah, how they wrote it. They could have wrote it for both of them to get away. You know what I mean? Like, because I get that he got shot and he was like, damn it, I'm shot. This is a bad wound I got, and I'm not going to make it anyway. I get it, but I just feel like, like, just do better, writers in Hollywood. Do better. And the fact that, and you've mentioned this before, right? There were no Black women in the whole movie. Like, not even, I didn't remember seeing one as an extra running down the street.
Were there any Latinos? Were there any Indigenous women? Where were we? Where was this movie? Alaska? I'm like,
I don't know. Portland.
Right out the West
Foods.
That's right, okay. Things are explained now. No.
So my it's a combination of a side eye. Yeah, my side eye is how there were not at least 3 more children. Because if I'm stuck, I would have been pregnant as we came into present day. Or somebody would have lived through having babies. Fun, unless they were saying, because we know that Sandra Bullock's character is a little bit older than him, unless they were saying she just couldn't have no more babies. Ain't no way in hell wouldn't be no more babies with him. I'm just saying. Well,
I mean, that's the thing too, is that is one of those practical things that you're like, You know, and even when like I'm looking at the going, I know how old Sandra Bullock is, so maybe her actual baby was like one of those change of life babies where you were like psych,
Right.
and then she just went through menopause and they're good.
Yes, I don't know. Fine as he is, it would have been like, yes, it's 7 of us on the
But you know, people have planned effectively,
Yes.
in a variety of ways long before we had some of the methods.
Nature does tend to take its course and stuff. Like the folks always like to tease, like, if you were stuck on a desert island with this beautiful man for 10 years, and we came back and we found you, I said, yeah, you'll find me and my 8 babies.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just gonna be honest.
It would have upped the ante if she had at least been pregnant, and it would have been believable if she had been pregnant when they were trying to make it down the river. I certainly would have bought it.
I don't know if this is a side eye. I don't know if it's a side eye or I think a no side. I don't know. A no process is where's the gas coming from?
Okay,
How
so
are these cars maintained?
So you're the chemist. You tell me. So early on, you could siphon gas from other vehicles. You could
I'm
do
talking
whatever.
5 years
After
on.
5 years,
Right?
doesn't it?
Yeah.
Doesn't it become unstable? Like at some point, it just.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, I'm thinking about a typical in the initial phases where the shit's hitting the fan on the global scale. We know what happens, and you see a bit of it in the movie. People make a run on resources, right? And everyone who's ever driven a car or owned a car and the maintenance of the car, oil changes, the refinement of petroleum fuels, and even if worldwide consumption goes down, if the gas is not in the gas station because the gas station isn't being full in your region, you're gonna fucking run out. You're just gonna run out, and that is gonna happen in some fine. So how are you even gonna be able to travel farther afield to use, like, even if the next town over, which I'm not quite sure where this movie is set, but even say that there's a full gas station 50 miles away, are you walking? Like, that's why I'm just thinking, like, at some point, other disaster movies do a great job of showing how quickly infrastructure and resources they're not available to you.
Yeah.
And even if you stockpile gasoline, how much are you going to safely keep in your house? Even if you owned a farm and you had your own tanks and stores, those still get full, refilled. I'm just thinking back to, I lived in Nebraska in grad school. It depends on how big your storage tank is, what you're rated to keep, like agricultural diesel to run different machines, which is usually spiked and dyed and regulated by the government because it's for personal field use. You've got to purchase that and refill. Like, once you run out, you're out. Like, good luck with you and your tractor. But
in this environment, add to that they can't see anything.
Yeah.
You're not driving 50 miles. You're walking blindfolded.
And the cars aren't being maintained, like, different engines and stuff. Like, I get, like, that's why you see in some other disaster movies, right? Like and TV shows, people go real old school. Horses, lots of walking, even the bicycles, because, maintaining any kind of, even the most rudimentary, or what we now think of rudimentary, you got to grease the gears, you've got to maintain it, you've got to patch holes. Like, is there like a Jiffy Lube open? We just don't know. Like, and I know that that's just because I'm practical, but I literally, towards the end where you see where they're doing wheelies and like driving around and clearly hunting for people, the other people that are like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to us. My first thought was, where are they getting that gas? How they maintain their cars? Fine, because they can maintain the cars. But my more thing was how they getting the oil and where are they getting that gas? And a constant supply. We're 5 years in.
Yeah.
Yep.
I thought about that too. I thought about, that hit me too.
Because who's working the refinery plant? Like, I'm just thinking, is someone still drilling for oil? Do we still have an oil market? That's actually good news. I would be like, oh shit, we're still trading? Awesome. We just need to get the hell out of this hellscape. And then we're good to go.
So go ahead, Danielle.
No, go ahead. No, go, Lolly.
So for me, the side eye was the trip to the grocery store. So they get in the car. They have the bright idea to newspaper over all the windows. They get in the car and they're like, how are we going to see where we're going? Well, we have GPS. So, okay, great. But everything at this point has broken down. Like, this is something that came in fast and hard. So are there servers being maintained? Who's still running the Wi-Fi? Like, is there power still running? Is there, how is this GPS still just magically working?
Is my Sirius satellite radio is still got my hot jam station? Right. This is convenient.
Right. So that's number one. So, but let's assume that it's still working. Then it's a great idea. You just follow the directions, turn right, turn left, whatever, blah, blah, blah. The most that they hit was a body in the road. There would be cars in the road.
Yeah.
There would be cars blocked off. Like, people were crashing everywhere. They wouldn't have made it more than half a block.
So did they have one of those collision cameras? Like, that was the only thing I was thinking of.
They had to block it off. They did.
Right. They had to block the camera.
So they got some indication when things were moving in. Because remember, at one point they could tell. But you're like, at the very least, how they didn't puncture a tire. Like, they should punctured a tire. Like, something bad should have happened to that car. But that was. But
they got there and they got back. I'm very impressed.
They got there and they got back. Like, how'd they get out of that parking lot? There's parking stumps all over a parking lot. Like, can you imagine driving your little
It should have been, it should have been bad. It should have been bad. So, so my no science was that was about not having the side I was at. The electricity, like, they kept electricity for what seemed like a long time. So they were still washing clothes in the washing machine. Like, they were just like, oh, we're bunking out for several weeks, so many weeks. That was, yeah.
I think we have people for a variety of reasons think things will last longer than they actually do. As far as, oh, well, if the power plant doesn't get blown up, we'll be fine. No. It's not one of those, like, until it all falls down. It's one of those active maintenance things. Like, everything should have gone dark and shit should have gone real crazy much faster. And I think it already went crazy really fast, but like, all of the infrastructure things should have hit the fan, considering how much we're dependent on the grid. If people monitoring the Eastern Seaboard grid, like, I'm loving the fact that they're tracking this thing, and I'm like, but how though? Because nobody's.
And their house should have looked like a hoarder house.
Yeah.
Like, because as soon as things start to break down, if every time you have to go outside you're blindfolded and you find a stack, like, you're not going to take one pair of blue jeans, you're going to take all of them.
Yep.
You're taking everything. You're taking there should have been toilet paper floor to ceiling. And like
cans of those fried onions and green bean soup to the floor to the ceiling.
Every part of that house should have been piled high with, like, boxes and crates, and especially 5 years in, because they don't have potable water. They can't, none of their machinery is running, like, nothing. So everything they have is basically just consumable at that point.
Or they should have been nomadic, where they were constantly moving. Like, they'll stay in one place, live there for a few days, and then up and go to the next place until they got somewhere else. Which I know they were making their way. If it wasn't for the hunters, the human monsters out there, that would have been my option, is to go slow. We'll live from place to place to place as we get from place to place, consume things, rest up with the kids, and then get to the next one. So I don't know what to say for Clark Kent. I mean, because it was a lot about this world that they wanted us to accept. And so everything was ridiculous. But I'm going to go with why were the people who could see wearing blindfolds? Like, they were wearing blindfolds even when they weren't hunting for people. Like, old boy out in the water, he was out there presumably fly fishing in the water. He had on his blue blockers, when all of a sudden he's like, hey, take your blindfold off in the water. He was just hanging out. He had on waders. Like, he was just like another day, like, fly fishing. Oh, some people coming blindfolded. Then he's like, let me attack them. But like, why was he wearing that?
Because everybody else was like, if you're trying, that's why I got to the idea of this is their ploy. And some people are better con artists than others. Is if you saw someone not wearing a blindfold, that's a dead giveaway that this son of a bitch is up to no good. That's the new normal. Is everybody should be with the blindfold or a blanket or a balaclava. I don't know. Like
even the people who can walk around outside are a menace to each other because you don't know what their intentions are.
Oh, good point. Like the presumption that they'll be allies. Like if that's the case, they should have all taken each other out by now. Then, like,
yeah,
wow. But
so I also had a hard time with the Clark Kent and the No Science because the storytelling is very narrow. There's a lot of questions and there's not a lot of answers. So for me, the Clark Kent and the No Science kind of merged, and that's the whole thing about how these creatures can't come inside.
Yes.
I didn't see it. So like, what are they, vampires? Like I didn't see anything that would cause me to differentiate between outside a domicile versus inside a domicile. Like that didn't make sense to me at all. There had to be enough open doors.
That was going to be my other thing. If you left the door open, would they get in? Because old boy didn't try to open the door to let them in. He just opened the. That's why I was thinking, is it related to sunlight? Like
I don't know. I didn't see anything.
That's the thing is like the blanket is, all the light is getting through because you can't see. Doesn't mean that it's not, if it's not being absorbed by the material, it is going through the medium and coming straight at you. So
what about this? What if it's not related to sunlight per se? What if it's an actual creature that you see, but you're not aware that you're seeing it? Like if it's so different or so bizarre or so far outside of our realm of understanding, or I don't know, whatever, some BS Star Trek thing out of sync with our plane or our time, or like something that's so alien about it that you're actually seeing a physical thing, and that's what you have to be exposed to, but you're not aware that you're seeing it. Or the other part is, because everybody who sees it loses their mind and kills themselves, we have no frame of reference. We never get to see through their eyes. We only see the eyes of the survivors who haven't seen it.
That's why I wish I knew more about birds and why, we don't see, because typically when we talk about responsive animals or in horror movies, I'm thinking of the best one, which is Dreamcatcher, where literally every animal in the damn forest runs out of the forest and the people are like, I wonder what's going on.
So there have been a couple of papers in the last 18 months that were talking about how birds perceive color, that they can see colors that we can't see. So a bird that looks black to us actually may appear rainbow colored or iridescent to another bird. So I mean, and we know that, the cones versus, all of the eye structure with dogs and humans is different. Clearly birds. I'm wondering too, it's like, okay, so if it's the reception of information in that way, because when I think about that scene where Mallory and her sister are in the car, right? And I'm just thinking like, I really do want to go back and play that scene, because the time of which she's not looking dead ahead, looking at a side window, or she's turning in this way and her sister's looking forward. I'm just thinking, you are one lucky.
Yeah.
Like we're talking like seconds, if not sub-second time span. And so that part really interests me too, because, all of that happening. And then when she's walking by that big window and the lady sees whatever she sees when she's coming out of her OBGYN appointment, and the peripheral versus she's looking at this woman, like that was really interesting to me, to be like, okay, so what is the range, right, of this thing? But also I could see through that blanket. So like, I'm not saying it was perfect, but
you could see through, like even now, like I could still perceive some light. And so when they did the blindfold scene lens, you could still see little things through the weed. So I think about what you just said, Lolly. Like, okay, can they come in and out? Even if you can't perceive it, if it's physical, what stops it from coming inside? Like, I still go back to like that thing. And I get that whenever it comes around, it freaks the birds out. Like, it freaks them out, and they don't like the birds tweeting about them either. Like it. So it becomes reciprocal. Like, the birds freak out, and then the Dementors, that's what I'm gonna call it. The Dementors don't like it, and so they kind of get whipped up in a frenzy.
But the birds aren't killing themselves, right? They're not pulling out of the core. Like, I'm thinking the core where the birds all, you know. So that part's really interesting.
Right.
The birds don't kill themselves. We don't see any other mammals around, so we don't know.
I agree.
To them.
Where's Fido?
So now I have a couple of questions. Like, so do snakes survive? Because birds are reptiles, right?
Yeah. Cockroaches.
So do snakes survive? Do turtles survive? Now I'm just waiting for. So what Ray just said convinced me that it's actually a physical entity that you have to be looking at. That is not just ambient lighting, right? Because of the timing of the way that she was exposed. So now I'm just waiting for the parody where the survivors are all the people who are just like.
Hold on.
Or people who have deep vision problems, like people who are like, oh, I'm blind without my glasses. All those people should lose their glasses and should be fine. Like, everyone who is clinically, who I don't know what the numbers are, like if they're 80-80, like like they all should have made it, and everyone looking down at their devices. So we actually have more survivors out there than we think.
But I think that's, part of the fun, interesting part is when looking at this and thinking about it from, if I was a scientist that studied eye development, I would be using this movie as a good discussion point across species to really get into it, to be like, and also I'm glad that you pointed that out. I was like, where the hell are the dogs? But when I think about it, where the hell are all the mammals? Because and not a pest to be seen. Mosquitoes not an issue. Like what? Like
there's no bats. Nobody's eating the mosquitoes, and nobody's hunting anything anymore. There's no population suppression. There's no more encroachment. There's bears. There should be deer. There, especially in Northern California, where it appears that this is.
And didn't they have a garden? Am I wrong in thinking that they had some like vegetation or something?
Yeah.
You have to control that.
Stuff should have been moved. You're right. They when they go into these houses, they should have been spooked by some raccoons and possums jumping out. Yeah.
And but even when we get to the School of the Blind, and how are they sustaining their own? Because they're not going. I mean, that place was out there, man. Like, how are they sustaining their own livelihood as far as food? Because they looked good. There wasn't a scurvy among them.
They were kind of they were thick in the hips. They were all good. And then they had that little, I don't know, what do they call that? With the little
atrium?
Yeah.
Mercola.
But everyone had shiny hair and good skin and the teeth looked all right.
They were wearing those Matrix clothes, though. They were wearing rags, though. Like, they played that part up. Like, look, hand-me-down rags, the random clothes that we all wear. But other than that, magic, that's it. It was just a plot.
And I was so happy. I was so happy to see the doc, but my first thing was like, how did you get here? I'm glad you're alive because I like you, and you're the only woman of color who's made it through this thing.
And they need a doctor,
like this is convenient. That's good. But how did you get here?
How long has she been there? Like, did she run out that same, like, parallel? Did the doc run out the same day? Yeah. And how did she make it?
But that's good, right? That made me ask more questions. But literally, I'm looking at her going, skin looks good, hair looks good. Y'all look fed. How?
That's the contrast, right? That's the storytelling device that when they finally get there, it's the relief, right? This idea that there's this light at the end of the tunnel, this idea that they're not always going to be living in fear, right? Like animals, like just surviving for 1 minute.
Because they were playing and laughing, and God knows their life up to that point. I'm like, damn, Sandra Bullock, you ran a tight ship.
Yeah, so you know what? And you really feel it, the gut punch when they're like, "What's your names, girl, boy?" I felt it, and the doctor was just like, "Your your name's this girl, and
Yeah.
and that's what Sandra's like. Wait a minute, you do have a name.
That's why I like Tom, right? Character of like they got to have hope, and like he, you know, that was a very different parenting style too, because it kind of reminded me of the disciplinarian, and kind of the quote, you know, fun parent nurturer in a way, even though they were both taking care of these kids in very different ways. But the other thing on Black Twitter, I don't know if y'all saw this, but how do you maintain that tight ass fade?
I had that wrote down too. I wrote that down. I was like, his fade.
And I'm like, damn, that's funny. And that is so true.
I thought that too. How did he did maintain that fade. He stayed tight, real tight.
And the edges looked bam, bam, bam.
He was in the mirror.
As soon as I saw that on Twitter, I was like, oh my God. And I went back to the last, you know, his last scene on the movie. I'm like, even to the end. Even to the end.
He was like, with the mirror, I guess, dude. Yeah, but so did anyone else pick up the whole like non-traditional family? Like nobody used any titles, boy, girl, Mallory, Tom, like they were not mother, father.
To me, that spoke to her trauma. Mm-hmm. So the babies are born. This is not a pregnancy that she wanted to start with.
Yeah.
We don't find out until the birth scene which child is actually hers.
Right.
Right. Because at first I was thinking she had twins, and then we get the introduction of this other pregnant woman. And so the pregnant woman is killed at the moment, you know, of birth. So at the moment that these two children are born, at least from a parent's perspective, the worst thing that could possibly happen happens, right? So you have this world that is defined by this singular fear that you're going to see outside, you're going to be exposed to these things, you're going to be vulnerable, you're going to lose your mind, and you're going to kill yourself or harm somebody else or whatever. And all those things happen at the moment of these children's birth, and this responsibility is thrust upon her doubly, a responsibility that she doesn't want to begin with. So she can't reject the responsibility, but she also is so traumatized that she cannot fully engage with these children as their mother. Yeah. She doesn't give names. They don't call her mom. They don't call Tom dad, even though he de facto is their father. Yeah. And so she is constantly maintaining a distance from them in anticipation of losing them.
Yeah.
Which is a very real thing as a parent. You know, I have had with my own children, by comparison, very mundane, but in the moment still very terrifying, of where the possibility of losing your child comes up. Either your child gets physically lost, or they have a medical issue that comes up, and you have to make decisions. And that's, for me, as a mom, that's been the really trying part of being a parent. You know, I love my children dearly, but the constant worry of, am I doing it right? Am I doing the right thing? And knowing that I'm probably never going to know if I made the right decision. And knowing that every time I make a decision, I never am going to have the opportunity to go back and fix it. Once I make the decision, it's made, and we just have to roll with it. And I just am constantly hoping, as privileged as my life is, I'm constantly hoping that I'm not screwing my kids up.
That was scary to me. When I think about, like, the monsters weren't scary, but that scene of having to deal with that while you're that physically vulnerable and emotionally vulnerable, and those women are coming from very different spots and they had different hopes and aspirations and desires and dreams. And it was that scene, like, everybody involved really nailed it. And it was scary. My heart really did break for everybody in that. And the kids, the parent, like, you're just like, well, this is just, because even though, like you're saying, like, even though they made it, some of them made it through, how did they, like, did make it through, but how they made it through. And I think that also comes back to how we judge, especially motherhood, because, you know, the mother in the story is really central. The father is still, as a default primary caregiver, we're still talking about, you know, well, also because she's the main character, right? But we're still focused on how a mother should behave.
Yeah.
and mothering, even though, did everyone witness what they all just went through? I mean,
and she survives, but then knowing what happens in the next year, she's got 2 babies, she's breastfeeding them, she's taking, as you talk to any parent of newborns and they tell you how hard and how exhausting it is, and she's doing it in an environment where she's constantly living in mortal terror and fear.
Yeah.
It's surprising to me that she wasn't more traumatized, that her psychosis.
Oh no, I bet if we could do some scientific brain scans of boy and girl's brains, it's all kinds of short synapses.
But see, that also gets me back to my earlier thing about, with the quote crazy seeing and not seeing, is given what they've all the family unit that we're introduced to is gone through. And the parents, the kids, the kids don't know any better. They think this is what a family looks like,
right?
Because that's their normal. But when I think about her mental health and his mental health, I'm like, well, clearly it's, because that kind of gets me back of like, they have done, and the fact that they're able to have, whatever they built their family to. And I think for me, the kind of like touchy-feely take home is, being judgmental about what it means, motherhood and what a mother should look like and what a mother's love is and affection and naming kids. I feel like even in this, with all the shit that went on, it's like, I think she kind of did all right. Like, yeah. I know what I mean. It's like, damn, girl. Like,
yeah, no, she did great. And then they also threw a bone for those judgmental people, like in the scene when she's like, when Tom's like, girl is scared, boy is like, girl is scared of you. And so she's like, I'm sorry, girl. And she does the whole mama loves you, mama. So that was a bone for those people. Yeah, and it really was. It was for them because, because you and I both know, like, if you don't bring your tail here down, girl, scared or not scared, I have to come walk and find you.
But also in the boat, did anyone else catch that in the boat when she's like, one of you's going to have to look, and the boy volunteered and she was like, I'll be the one to decide. And girl was like, I knew it. I knew you bitch were going to come for me. I knew it.
That baby was, well, you know what though? What I took from that is the girl was fearless like her. Like when it was time to look for her, it was the girl who was like, I'm going. Like the girl, even as a little girl, she was already very daring and bold, just like Mallory was. She knew she was being disobedient. She was like, I'm going to go save her because she's been gone too long.
Yeah.
And she had a resolve in her face when she was just like, this is the second time he volunteered and you said nothing.
She's like, I know, I see the handwriting on the wall.
So Ray, are you saying that any one of them could have, after all that trauma, just walked outside and been fine?
You know what? I'm willing to play.
I'm just saying that because that mental health connection was sloppily done in my mind.
Yeah.
It was, they're in, and they didn't say, never once I remember them saying criminally insane. And criminally insane that's a legal diagnosis.
Right.
That was just somebody that was in a treatment center. Okay. Was that a day treatment center? Probably. Group therapy? Probably. Like, how many people that we have either all been in therapy, know people in therapy? Like, what level does it have to be? Schizophrenia? Does it have to be violence? Like, I want to know, because the sloppiness means that you're about to have a bunch of people who, if not already, have some type of mental health issue that they're battling with, are about to have one. So is this a thing where you thought you were fine, but after the trauma of going through it, you might, in 3 years, if you make it that long, you might crack under the pressure and one day turn into Gary? Like,
right. So here's the thing. So looking at the science of it is, it's now, they open up the door for some fanfic to talk about mental illness as an adaptive trait. So having, in other words, it's adaptive. So whether it is a little or a lot, or it gets expounded upon, but, as you go through more and more trauma, it changes, let's say, the epigenetics of you or whatever. And
so it's not an illness, right? Like, that's the thing, is it's not an illness anymore.
Well, it's not, and that's how adaptation works that most people don't get. It's any trait that, when under the circumstances, is now selected for. And so if it keeps you alive and you have more babies, being mentally ill, big quotation marks, you now win. Now, when it comes to boy and girl, I would, if I was writing some scientifically based fanfic, I would go through the whole trauma during pregnancy and how that shapes, like that physiologically shapes, you know, you can have these non-genomic effects. Like they've been so traumatized since the womb. You know, these babies are technically, you know, how we talk about digital native children, where they're, you know, dementor native children. Like it's not, you know, like
they just bust out, walk out of the school for the blind and be like, we're good.
Like, suppose she did let one or both of the children look because they're young and innocent, or in this case, they're already adapted to it. That's a whole different story, where the children who were born during this trauma are the ones who, like, the children, the blind, you know, the children who will show them the way. Like, that's a completely different story that they could have taken, and it opens it up. So you fanfic out there, just giving you several prompts.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing, is it could, you know, that's part of the question is, you know, the motivation, what are the effects, what are we seeing after that? And I think that's the interesting thing. That's why I meant, like, I thought it was a good action movie and fun, but the more time that's gone by, I'm like, you know, like, you talk to people about it, you ask them what they think, you know, about these different things that happen. And you're like, oh, damn, I didn't see that. Did you? Yeah. Like, and I think that's what I like about it is, you know, to me, sometimes too, a good movie doesn't have to be like, I don't know, The English Patient. It could be a movie like this where you are actually, because it just won a bunch of Oscars, that's why I said it. But you're able to people have these alternative theories. You can have a good argument about it. And yet you're all like, I will give you that. Like, that's why I really think that Bird Box, and plus look at the social media impact of this movie. I mean, this shit blew up and people were,
like, 50 million views in the first however many days. It was crazy.
Like, it's a Christmas movie now. Like, it's forever.
So what's interesting is I watched it with my 12-year-old daughter, and she, said the part that scared her was not the idea of monsters. It wasn't the idea of seeing something horrible. It was the idea that people were harming themselves. Mm-hmm. It was the idea that the outcome of it was that you became your own undoing.
Yeah.
That you couldn't trust yourself to save yourself. Like, once you were exposed, it was yourself that was the danger.
He always went through. Really, yeah. Her insight is always amazing.
And I think that's, you know, that's, again, I agree, that is the terrifying thing, because most people would, you know, be that I might be driven to harm someone else or do horrible things, but I will put myself first. And that is not what has occurred. And people, not only that, but they think, oh, well, I guess if that were to happen, just like in, you know, I'm thinking about The Walking Dead, where there were lots of scenes where people would come into homes and see that clearly that people had kind of gone a euthanasia route, if they will, because they knew what was coming, and they did it in a very intentional way because they did not want to come back as one of these things, right? But when I think about this movie, the ways of which people were harming themselves too were deeply shocking.
Yes. And desperate, you know, somehow desperate.
Desperate. I mean, that's what you saw was sheer terror and desperation. And I think part of it being kind of a self-centered, you know, and not in a bad way, but this drive to what we think is an innate, all natural drive to survive is gone like that with no explanation.
Yeah. And that's the part, you know, thinking again, like an evolutionary biologist, like, what would it be to undo just what's built into every living thing on this planet? Like, it's built in us at our cellular level. And for that to just be undone instantaneously, like, that's the sci-fi part of it. There's like, whoa, like, what mechanism could that be?
Because when I think about, you know, certain treatments, like if a person is, you know, you need them to snap out of it, sometimes you put them in intentional painful, harmful situations, or like I'm going to dunk this person's head under water because I know that their reflex is going to be like a system reboot. Right. But yet that is it, we are watching, you know, you're watching almost rapid species decline in a second.
And loss of reflex. Like, that's a good point. Yeah. Complete loss of reflex. Like, people have no more reflexes to get out of danger.
No. Right. They run, they literally, whatever. And it's like when the one scene that got me, I know it got one of my family members, is when she opened up the burning car's door and sat in the car. Like, that was like, we all were like,
well, and then and then not only did she do that, but then, like you said, like there was like whatever had rerouted her circuitry, she didn't scream in pain.
Nope.
She didn't run and flail. So I'm just like, it wasn't just that it undid us evolutionarily, but it blocked everything. Like, you don't have pain receptors anymore.
No screaming. When that lady was the first one you see in the hospital, ramming her head into the wall, into the window. And the self-emulation, the idea that there's none of the reflexes that we literally call them, even when you do really mean to cause yourself harm. Some of these things that you see with these circumstances are all gone. Even when you mean it, they don't do them. And that was like, that sent like, I don't know, like a cold sweat, because that's when you really realize that this is a change that is fundamental. Yeah. Right? And that, how fast does that happen? And like Lolly, you're saying with the physical thing, I mean, we're talking like complete survival instinct.
Yeah, just shut off, just completely shut off.
And yet, does that mean the pain receptors and like your central nervous system has been that damaged? We're not only like, I don't know. I mean, I think I've just realized that when you said that, Danielle, I'm like, I was so focused on the survival thing. I completely did not realize that the normal instinct of pain and just even the flinching, like even when they would call it a pugilist stance, when you're exposed to high heat, your muscles start to seize up and you do this. You didn't even see, like, she just is like relaxed, sitting in the car. Like that is the kind of thing too, of like, even the flinching. And even if you were determined, you still do some of these things because you can't, those are not actual things you can control. Yeah. And that is like, what does that mean then for the mechanism of whatever this thing is?
And that's what makes it scary, because you're like, I truly have no defenses. We can't see it. We don't know when it's coming. We don't know how it's transmitted. We don't know how far and wide it spreads. We don't know what conditions it doesn't exist in. And then, like you said, I can't trust myself to keep myself safe. I can't trust all this machinery that's designed to at least say, hey, get up out of here. Like fight, flight, and fight, freeze, no longer.
There's no second chances. There's no opportunity for a learning curve. There's nothing.
Nothing. And you did it to yourself. Like, your body did it to itself. Because I mean, it's fair to say these people aren't themselves anymore. Like, you know, like once you get that marble glitter, you know, because like how marbles look cracked, once you get the marble crack in your eye, like, and it seemed like there was nothing you could, like, they became strong. You couldn't restrain them.
Nothing. But you really couldn't try. That's the other thing, right? Because, you know, and that's too, even with the B.D. Wong's character, who I'm forgetting his name, is that I knew it wasn't enough when I saw them, just because of the ferocity. Not only is it like you don't have a survival instinct or a pain or like physical response, some of these reflexes we're talking about, but you have a singular determination to the exclusion of everything else. I mean, because we're not just talking about, well, let me just raid the old medicine cabinet and take these 20 Oxycontin with this shot of vodka. Like, no, you're talking about this person that was, you know, effectively tied to a chair, that you're like, we think we've taken everything, still found a way. Like, that's the weird thing too, is what is that all about? Like, that is also, so not only do you get rid of all of the survival stuff, but you then replace it with a single-minded determination
to do yourself in.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm gonna call them the mentors, because that's, I mean, truly, it's like, woo.
All right, so let's wrap it up. What do we think? If we were going to rate this movie out of 10, 10 being the best, Danielle, what would you give it?
I really enjoyed this movie, and I actually think it was some of Sandra Bullock's best acting. I really enjoyed her in it. Like she pulled off Mean Mom. She did it. Yeah. I would recommend it to others. I give it a 9. I really liked it.
All right, how about you, Ray?
I don't know. Gosh, to me, I would say 7. Oh. And that's not a bad score. I mean, when you think about, a super awesome, superior movie, 7 or 8. I don't know if I'd watch it again. I think if I was going to watch it again, it would literally be because I'm like going to skip around to certain spots and be like, I knew she looked out the window. Like that would be like, rather than like, oh, I gotta, when I think about a movie where I would score it, I'm absolutely watching that again. Like this would be more of like, it was an enjoyable movie in that gave me a lot to think about. I just am thinking, my hesitation is, would I be like, let's watch it again from the beginning to the end? And I just don't know if that's there for me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I give this movie a solid 8. I think, especially from my perspective as a parent, it was very scary. It was a very scary film. I enjoyed it very much, but I would not watch it again. That's not an indictment of the movie. There are plenty of movies that I liked that I would not watch a second time. But I think this movie does a lot with very little.
Yes. Agree.
It's a very close-in storytelling. It's not a very populated movie. It's very, very focused on very few characters. There's almost no exposition at all, and it does a lot with that. And it had me thinking about it for a long time, and it led to some really interesting conversations about people's motivations for doing things, particularly the mom, and as it's revealed to us what her journey has been. So I would give it a solid 8.
I think I would, it's definitely between a 7 and an 8. I think I wouldn't watch it again. I want to reiterate, like Lolly said, it's not because it's not a good movie. It's just more of like, I've seen it. What would I be watching it again for? Unless literally, let's go back and try to figure out, because the time, now I'm almost like the timetable. I still am like, but I would be watching it now to be like, making my spreadsheet, pie chart, diagram, like that's why I would watch it. But I think that what is funny though is when it's always a good discussion item. I ran into a colleague, but have you seen Bird Box? What are the monsters? Like, I think that part is really fun. And I think if anything, Netflix is continues to be a beast, because let's be honest, that movie was better than some of the released shit that came out in the theaters.
So
by a long shot.
It got so much buzz. I thought it was a theater movie. Like so
it actually did. It had a limited release in the theater, but only so that it could be considered for award season.
Right.
Oh. Right. I thought it, because when everybody kept saying they watched it on Netflix, I was like, wait, I thought it was at the movies. Like it got so much buzz so fast. Like I heard people talking about it in December, and then all of a sudden I'm like, you're right. Netflix has become a beast, like a big beast. And
I'll be interested to see how this shifts, like if it shifts, some of the marketplace and investment, because, on the other hand, Netflix has canceled shows that you're like, but that was making I don't understand why you just canceled that. Like, so what, is this going to shift any, decisions as far as how that thing is marketed? But I think that'll be interesting to see. Like, they're just certain, and what is it about this movie? Some they do well, but some become their own like memes, right? And their own, and it's weird to say that, but it reminds me a bit of Sharknado in that challenges, memes, gifts, like the idea that you're like, but why this? But why?
Really pop. So at least along, like, I saw a lot of comments on Black Twitter. So immediately there were a lot of Black churches that were having Bird Box sermons. Yes, yes. Where, you know, ministers talking about living through faith, and like I saw immediately all these, yes,
dead.
Yes. Or Finding My Man, Bird Box edition. Like, I mean, seriously, it's ridiculous. But it has instantly.
But why? That's the thing is, what is it about this movie as far as marketing, as far as whatever, that's just been like, that it's just gotten that kind of, and I think sometimes in some ways the ones that people thought would be this kind of engagement aren't. But this one, like, I don't know if they, you know, I don't believe that they are that strategic and that like able to plot this out. But damn, did this movie, like, it just blew up. And that whole Bird Box challenge, I'm like, how about if you not sneak up on an alligator?
Yeah, that was if I had a side eye, that would be it. That's my side eye for this movie. Challenge.
You know when Netflix has to be like,
please
stop doing that.
So, and I'm also looking forward to the ecology Twitter think pieces in 6 months from when everybody bought birds as pets and starts letting them go after they get sick of taking care of them.
Right.
And now we're going to have all these exotic birds everywhere.
So Florida is going to be like pythons and like canaries? Like, is that what you're...
It's going to be like the Galapagos up in here. We're going to have our own populations of finches flying around. Exotic.
Like, you know, just get you some sparrows. Sparrows and pigeons.
Right.
Okay, we expect updates, Lolly, from our Florida correspondent.
All right, guys. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
This has been a great discussion. This is probably one of the movies that made me really, really think this year. It was a good end to 2018. We'll keep you updated on Twitter as to what our next review is going to be. Thanks for hanging in there, everybody. Good night.
Night.